Hi and welcome. In this video I'll be doing an oil change on my Moto Guzzi Le Mans 1000. Okay, let's get started. Now, as I said earlier, the oil filter is actually inside the sump. The very early Moto Guzzi V-twins didn't actually have an oil filter, which was quite a common practice back in the 1960s. But when they went to an oil filter, the cheapest method of doing it was integrating it into the inside of the sump. And so all they really had to do was redesign the sump, and away they went. Unfortunately, Moto Guzzi kept that practice for many years, and even though this bike was made in 1991, it still has an oil filter inside the sump. It really wasn't until really the late 90s that Moto Guzzi actually re-engineered everything so you could actually access the filter without taking the sump off. And the Le Mans 1000 has an added bonus in that we've got this sump spacer here as well. So you've got, a heavy sump plus a spacer that you have to juggle without spilling oil on the deck. Because even though you can drain the oil drain is at the back, you will find that there is a residual amount of oil in the sump, and it's quite easy to spill it if you're not careful. Now, I've already drained the oil from this bike. I did that earlier when I started doing some work on the bike, taking the top end off the bike. So the sump plug's actually on the back of the sump, so I've undone that. The other thing you can do is check that magnetic pickup to make sure there's not excessive amounts of metal particles on it, because that is a good indicator of wear and tear in the engine. Now, I find the easiest way to take the sump off is there's 4 bolts under the sump here, 2 at the front, 2 at the back, which are where the main oil lines are. I undo those first, then support under the sump with a jack of some kind. Then I can undo all the outside bolts. Well, here's the sump off the bike. I've just bolted the sump and the sump spacer together because I'm trying to save the lower gasket. I'm a bit of a cheapskate. I use the lower gaskets a couple of times. It's certainly a lot easier to just disassemble a lot and replace both gaskets. I'll replace this upper gasket though. So here's the oil filter here, the screen that feeds the oil pump, and back here we've got the overpressure valve. So this maintains the maximum oil pressure in the bike. And here we've got oil lines front and back. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the filter off, and then I'll drain all the residual oil out of the sump. There's a little bit on this side here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to make it easier, I'm just going to clamp this to the bench. Then using a filter tool, Now I've also put the sump plug back in so that this oil that comes out of the filter won't drain out onto my bench. So I'll just sit that there for a while, and then I'll drain this and we'll clean it up and come back and I'll reinstall the filter. Well, I've cleaned up the cases, wiped it all out with a rag. Every service or so, it's worthwhile taking off the screen and giving that a wash in petrol, particularly if you see a build-up of debris on it. I did it last service, so it's pretty much clean. So now it's time to put on the filter. Now these high flow filters come pre-oiled, so you don't even have to oil them, which is a bit of a bonus. I'll just spin that on. Now you don't need to over tighten these filters. Just give it another half turn or so. And that's the filter installed. Now it's pretty much ready to install on the bike. I'll just take this gasket off the top here, put my new gasket on, and then I'll bolt it back on. Place the gasket. Now it's time to fit. Now I've cleaned this upper surface here so it's nice and clean. I'll just set that on my jack. Hold it in place. I've got the gasket sitting in there. So now we just need to put some of the perimeter bolts in. Now there's no need to over tighten any of these bolts. Well, now it's time to put in the oil. The manual specifies a 10 weight 50 oil. I'm using a 20 weight 50 fully synthetic Moto in mine. In our warmer climate, there's certainly no issues running at 20 weight 50. Now, it is recommended that you run a zinc additive in these older engines because modern oils had most of the zinc removed because it contaminated the catalytic converter. So with these flat tappets on these engines, you can get excessive wear if you just run a straight mineral or synthetic oil without that zinc additive. Now there are specialist oils that do contain high levels of zinc, but if you're using an ordinary oil where you're not sure of what the zinc level is, you can buy an aftermarket additive. Often they're referred to as break-in oils. The one I'm using is an Australian product called ZDDP, I think is the name. I'll put a picture of that up to show you what it is. But certainly there's a variety of choices you can use there. With that Australian product, you put in roughly 100 mils into the 3 litres of engine oil. And with a bit of luck, that should protect your flat tappets from excessive wear. Okay, let's get on with putting the oil in. Now we install the sump plug. Don't forget to put a new crush washer on there. Well, that's the oil change completed. All you need to do now is run the engine for a while to bring up the oil pressure and allow the oil to circulate through the system, shut it off, let it cool down and settle for 5 minutes, and then check the oil level and top up if necessary. And it's also worth checking all the bolts on the sump and the sump plug as well, just to make sure that nothing's come loose. I think that's about it, and I'll catch you next time.